Picture this. Amsterdam, February 1637. A smoky tavern packed wall to wall with men shouting, sweating, their eyes wild with desperation and greed. On a wooden table sits a single flower bulb. Not a diamond, not gold. A tulip bulb, brown, unremarkable, about the size of an onion. The bidding starts. 1,000 guilders. Then 2,000. 3,000. The room erupts. Men are climbing over each other, waving promissory notes in the air like weapons. 5,000 guilders. 6,000. The final price? 6,000 guilders. Let me put that in perspective for you. In 1637, 6,000 guilders could buy you a grand canal house in the heart of Amsterdam, one of the most expensive properties in the wealthiest city on earth. That same amount could purchase 8 fat pigs, 4 fat oxen, 12 fat sheep, 2 loads of wheat for loads of rye, 2 hogsheads of wine for barrels of beer, 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a complete bed, a suit of clothes, and a silver drinking cup. All of that for one flower bulb that hadn't even bloomed yet. But here's where it gets truly insane. The man who bought it, he didn't even want to grow a flower. He was never going to plant it, never going to see its petals unfurl in his garden. He bought it for one reason only, to sell it to someone else for more money. And you know what? He probably did. Now, imagine your neighbor comes to you tomorrow and says they've quit their job. They've mortgaged their house. They've sold everything they own. Why? To trade flower bulbs. You'd think they'd lost their mind, right? You'd stage an intervention. But in 1637 Netherlands, this wasn't an isolated case of insanity. This was everyone. Blacksmiths were abandoning their forges. Weavers were leaving their looms. Farmers were neglecting their crops. An entire nation, one of the most sophisticated, educated, and economically advanced societies on earth, had collectively lost its mind over flowers. And here's the thing that should terrify you. It's happening again. Right now, Bitcoin hits $60,000 and everyone becomes a crypto expert. NFTs of cartoon apes sell for millions. Meme stocks send Wall Street into chaos. Your uncle who couldn't operate a smartphone last year is suddenly giving you investment advice about Dogecoin. Sound familiar? So here's the question we're going to answer today. Was tulip mania really the original pump and dump scheme? Were the Dutch victims of the world's first financial scam? Or does this 400-year-old flower craze reveal something deeper, something darker about human nature itself? Buckle up, because the story you're about to hear is wilder than any Hollywood script. And the lessons? They might just save you from becoming the next victim of history's most profitable con. To understand how an entire nation went crazy for tulips, you first need to understand just how powerful the Netherlands had become. The year is 1600. Most of Europe is trapped in the past. Feudal systems, absolute monarchies, religious wars tearing countries apart. But the Dutch? They're living in the future. The Dutch Republic has just broken free from Spanish rule. They're a tiny country. You could walk across it in a few days, but they're about to become the richest, most innovative society on the planet. And they're going to do it through one simple principle: trade. In 1602, something revolutionary happens. The Dutch create the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. Now, this isn't just any company. This is the world's first multinational corporation. The first company to issue stock. The first to create a modern corporation structure. They're not just trading goods. They're pioneering the entire concept of modern capitalism. And business is booming. Dutch ships are everywhere. Indonesia, Japan, India, Africa, the Americas. They're bringing back spices that are literally worth their weight in gold. Pepper, nutmeg, cloves. These aren't just seasonings to the Dutch. They're currency. They're power. They're the oil of the 17th century. The money flooding into Amsterdam is staggering. The city is exploding with wealth. Grand Canal houses are shooting up like weeds. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's first, is conducting transactions that dwarf anything seen before in human history. But here's what makes the Dutch Golden Age truly different. The wealth isn't just concentrated at the top. Sure, there are mega-rich merchants, but there's also something unprecedented emerging: a prosperous middle class. Shopkeepers, skilled craftsmen, Traders, clerks, people who in any other European country would be barely scraping by, are suddenly living lives of comfort. They have disposable income. They have savings. And most importantly, they have aspirations. They want to be like the nobles. They want to signal their status. They want to show off. And in the Dutch Golden Age, there's no better way to show you've made it than through your possessions. Your art collection, your furniture, your garden. Oh, your garden. See, the wealthy Dutch have developed an obsession with gardens. Not just practical gardens for food, ornamental gardens, status gardens, gardens that scream, I'm so rich I can dedicate prime real estate to growing things that are purely decorative. And into this world of wealth, ambition, and status-seeking arrives a flower from the East. A flower unlike anything Europeans have ever seen. The tulip. Now, tulips originally came from the mountains of Central Asia. The Ottoman Turks had been cultivating them for decades, and they were prized in the Sultan's gardens in Istanbul. When Western diplomats saw these flowers, with their bold, saturated colors and elegant, symmetrical petals, they were mesmerized. In 1593, a botanist named Carolus Clusius brought tulip bulbs to the Netherlands. He was the prefect of the Hortus Botanicus, the botanical gardens at Leiden University, and he quickly realized these flowers were special. Tulips were vibrant in ways that native European flowers simply weren't. Reds that looked like liquid rubies, whites so pure they seemed to glow. And most fascinating of all, some tulips displayed breaks, dramatic streaks, and flames of contrasting colors that made each bloom unique. We now know these breaks were caused by a virus, the tulip-breaking virus. But in 1600s Netherlands, they seemed like magic. Clusius tried to keep his tulips exclusive, refusing to sell or share them. But Dutch entrepreneurs weren't about to let that stop them. His garden was raided multiple times. Bulbs were stolen. And just like that, tulips entered the Dutch market. And they were expensive. Even early on, a single rare tulip bulb might cost several years' wages for a skilled craftsman. But that wasn't a bug. That was the feature. The Dutch Golden Age had created something unique in history. A large population with disposable wealth and a burning desire for status symbols. Tulips checked every box. They were rare. They were exotic. They were beautiful. They were impossible to fake. And crucially, they were visible. Plant tulips in your front garden, and every person walking past knows you've got money. The nobility went crazy for them first. Having a diverse tulip collection became the ultimate power move among Amsterdam's elite. Paintings from the period show wealthy merchants and nobles posing with their prized tulip specimens like modern collectors pose with Ferraris. But remember, this is the Netherlands. This isn't a rigid aristocracy where only the nobility can play. This is a merchant republic where money talks and anyone can climb the social ladder. The middle class is watching the wealthy obsess over tulips. And they're thinking, if I can get my hands on some of these, I could be one of them. The demand is building. The social pressure is mounting. The stage is set. And that's when the professionals arrive. Now, growing tulips isn't like growing roses or daisies. Tulips have a weird life cycle that's about to become very important to our story. A tulip bulb takes years to grow from seed. Even after you've got a mature bulb, it only flowers for about a week each spring. Then it goes dormant. For most of the year, you're sitting on what looks like an onion, hoping it survives to bloom again. In the early years, tulip trading is pretty straightforward. Wealthy collectors buy bulbs from growers, plant them, show them off when they bloom. It's expensive, but it's legitimate horticulture. But by the 1620s, something is changing. Demand is outstripping supply. There aren't enough tulips to go around. Wealthy merchants are getting into bidding wars over rare varieties. A single bulb of the famous Semper Augustus, a stunning white tulip with dramatic red flames, becomes the ultimate status symbol. There are only 12 Semper Augustus bulbs in existence. 12 in the entire world. The owner, a wealthy merchant, refuses to sell. He just keeps them in his garden, knowing that every wealthy man in Amsterdam would bankrupt himself to own one. It's the ultimate flex. Other rare varieties have equally poetic names. Viceroy, Admiral Leifkens, Admiral van der Eyck, Scipio. Each one is as prized as a masterpiece painting. These aren't just flowers. They're living artworks, investments, and status symbols all rolled into one. Stories start circulating that fuel the mystique. A merchant offers 3,000 guilders for a single Semper Augustus bulb, enough to buy a house, and is turned down. The refusal only makes people want it more. But here's the problem. Tulip bulbs don't reproduce quickly. Even under ideal conditions, a mother bulb might produce 2 or 3 offsets per year. To meet the exploding demand would take decades. So the tulip traders, clever Dutch merchants who've made fortunes in global trade, they innovate. They create something new, something that will change everything. They invent tulip futures. Now, let me explain how brilliant and dangerous this is. Traditionally, you buy a tulip bulb in summer after it's been dug up from the ground. You can see it, touch it, verify its quality. Then you plant it and hope it blooms beautifully in spring. But what if you could buy a tulip in winter when it's still in the ground, dormant, invisible? The futures contract is born. You sign a piece of paper promising to buy a bulb that doesn't exist yet at a price agreed upon now for delivery later. The seller gets money up front. The buyer locks in a price before spring demand drives it higher. It's genius. It's also insane, because suddenly you're not trading tulips anymore. You're trading paper promises of tulips. And paper? Paper is easy to trade. Paper doesn't need soil or water. Paper doesn't die from frost. Paper can change hands 10 times in an afternoon. By the 1630s, a sophisticated market structure emerges. There are now professional tulip traders who never grow a single flower. They buy and sell futures contracts, making profits on the spread. Tulip colleges, essentially trading clubs, start meeting in taverns across Dutch cities. These aren't stuffy boardrooms. These are rowdy, beer-soaked gatherings where men huddle around tables, examining certificates, shouting prices, making deals. The atmosphere is electric. Every day, someone's getting rich. Every day, there's a new story of a weaver who bought low, sold high, and made more in a week than he'd make in a year of weaving. And this is where the psychology gets interesting. See, for most of human history, making money required labor. You worked hard, you got paid. Maybe if you were smart and lucky, you could build a successful business over decades. But tulips? Tulips were offering something seductive and dangerous. Effortless wealth. You didn't need to be skilled. You didn't need to work hard. You just needed to buy today and sell tomorrow. It was that simple, or so it seemed. The success stories are spreading like wildfire. A sailor hears about a chimney sweep who made 60 guilders profit in a single day, more than the sailor makes in 3 months of backbreaking work at sea. What does the sailor do? He borrows money and buys tulip futures. A farmer hears about the sailor who doubled his money in a week. The farmer mortgages his land and jumps in. A blacksmith hears about the farmer. A baker hears about the blacksmith. A widow hears about the baker. Like dominoes falling, each success story pulls in more people. And because prices keep rising, every new entrant makes money, which proves to everyone else that this is the surest investment in human history. This is the textbook definition of a bubble economy. But nobody in 1636 has ever seen a bubble before. They don't have the vocabulary for it. They don't have the historical precedent to warn them. All they see is everyone who bought tulips got rich. Everyone who didn't buy tulips stayed poor. The FOMO, the fear of missing out, becomes unbearable. Merchants start trading on margin, leveraging their positions to buy even more futures contracts. If you've got 1,000 guilders, why buy one contract when you can borrow 9,000 more and buy 10 contracts? When those 10 contracts each gain 10%, you've doubled your money. Of course, if they lose 10%, you lose everything and owe the bank 9,000 guilders. But who's thinking about that? Tulips only go up. The tavern colleges develop their own rules and customs. There's even a formal process. When a sale is made, the buyer pays wine money, a small percentage of the purchase price, to seal the deal over drinks. It's all very civilized, very official, very legitimate seeming. Pamphlets start circulating with price lists. tracking the hottest varieties and their latest valuations. It's the 1600s version of checking your stock portfolio on your phone. Everyone has an opinion on which varieties are poised to explode next. Arguments break out in taverns about whether Gouda is better than Admiral Demand. It sounds absurd, but fortunes are being made and lost on these debates. The market has become completely detached from the flowers themselves. Most traders have never grown a tulip. Many have never even seen one bloom. They're trading certificates that promise future delivery of bulbs that may or may not exist. One story perfectly captures the madness. A wealthy merchant receives a shipment of valuable goods from overseas. The delivery man, waiting in the warehouse for his tip, spots what he thinks is an onion sitting on the counter. Hungry, he picks it up and eats it. It wasn't an onion. It was a Semper Augustus bulb worth 3,000 guilders. The delivery man is thrown in prison. Not for theft, for destruction of property equivalent to eating someone's house. By late 1636, tulip mania has reached a fever pitch. Prices are doubling every month. Some varieties are appreciating 20x in 6 weeks. A single bulb of Viceroy tulip sell for the following items in trade: 2 loads of wheat, 4 loads of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 fat swine, 12 fat sheep, 2 hogsheads of wine, 4 barrels of beer, 2 barrels of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a complete bed, a pack of clothes, and a silver beaker. Read that list again. That's not a transaction. That's an entire farm's yearly output for one flower bulb. And people are calling the buyer a genius because next month he'll sell it for even more. The market has become unmoored from reality, but everyone's making money, so nobody cares. There are warning signs, of course. There always are. Some conservative merchants refuse to participate, calling the whole thing madness. Satirical pamphlets start circulating, mocking the tulip traders as fools who worship flowers. Political cartoons show people with tulip bulbs for heads. But these skeptics are dismissed as bitter, jealous, stuck in the old ways. They just don't get it. They don't understand that this time is different. Sound familiar? The rational people are being drowned out by the noise of success. Every skeptic who says this can't last is contradicted by someone else who just made a fortune. And so the bubble keeps inflating. Bigger, bigger, impossibly bigger. It's December 1636. The tulip market is reaching heights that seem utterly surreal. Some speculators aren't even bothering to finalize their transactions anymore. They're trading contracts on contracts on contracts, derivatives of derivatives. People are giddy with wealth. Dutch society is experiencing an economic high unlike anything in its history. Everyone knows that come spring, when the bulbs are dug up and contracts are settled, there's going to be a reckoning. Some people won't be able to deliver. Some bulbs won't be as valuable as promised. But spring is months away, and between now and then, there's still money to be made. Nobody realizes they're standing at the very peak of the bubble. Nobody knows that in just 6 weeks, it's all going to come crashing down. Let's pause and really understand what's happening here, because this is where tulip mania transforms from an expensive hobby into an economic catastrophe waiting to happen. The tulip futures market has evolved into something that would be recognizable to any modern financial trader. These Dutch merchants have essentially invented several financial instruments that won't become mainstream for another 300 years. First, they've created a functioning derivatives market. A tulip future is a derivative. Its value derives from an underlying asset, the tulip bulb, but the contract itself can be traded independently. Second, they've pioneered margin trading. Buyers are putting down deposits of 10 to 25% and borrowing the rest, using leverage to multiply their potential gains. Third, they've established what we now call market makers, professional traders who maintain liquidity by continuously buying and selling. The sophistication is remarkable. The problem? They're building a skyscraper on a foundation of flower bulbs. The fundamental disconnect is this. Tulip bulbs have some intrinsic value. They produce beautiful flowers. But that intrinsic value is maybe 10 to 20 guilders for a nice variety. Perhaps 100 to 200 guilders for something truly exceptional if you're a serious collector. The market is pricing tulips at thousands of guilders, some at tens of thousands. Not because of their value as flowers, but because of their expected resale value. In other words, the only reason a tulip is worth 5,000 guilders is because someone believes they can sell it for 6,000 guilders. And the only reason someone will pay 6,000 guilders is because they believe someone else will pay 7,000. This is called the greater fool theory. You can pay a foolish price for an asset, as long as there's a greater fool willing to pay even more. It works perfectly until you run out of fools. The tulip colleges accelerate this dynamic. These trading groups create echo chambers where everyone is reinforcing everyone else's belief that tulips are the investment of the century. Imagine a Facebook group, but in a 1600s tavern. Everyone's sharing their wins. Everyone's posting their gains. Nobody's talking about their losses, if they have any. The social pressure to participate becomes enormous. Your friends are getting rich. Your neighbors are getting rich. The guy who used to clean your chimney just bought a new house with tulip profits. Are you really going to be the only one left out? The psychological phenomenon is called social proof. When everyone around us is doing something, we assume it must be correct. Our brains are literally wired to follow the herd. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. But here's the dark side. Herds can stampede off cliffs. The leverage is what turns this from a speculation into a time bomb. When you're trading with borrowed money, your margin for error disappears. Let's say you buy a tulip future for 3,000 guilders, but you only put down 500 guilders of your own money. You've borrowed 2,500. If the price goes to 3,300 guilders, just a 10% increase, you can sell, pay back your loan, and you've turned 500 guilders into 800. That's a 60% return. But if the price drops to 2,700 guilders, also just 10%, you're now underwater. You owe 2,500 guilders, but your asset is only worth 2,700. Sell now, and you've got 200 guilders left from your 500. You've lost 60% of your money. And if prices drop 20%, you're completely wiped out. In fact, you owe money. This asymmetry is what makes leverage so dangerous. It magnifies gains, but it magnifies losses even more. And it means that a relatively small price decrease can trigger a wave of foreselling. But in late 1636, nobody's thinking about downside risk. Prices have been rising so long, so consistently, that people have forgotten they can fall. There's a cognitive bias called recency bias. We assume the recent past will continue into the future. If tulips have gone up every month for 2 years, our brains automatically assume they'll keep going up. The longer the bubble lasts, the more rational it seems. This can't be a bubble, people reason, because it's been going on for years. If it were going to crash, it would have crashed already. This is exactly wrong. The longer a bubble inflates, the more devastating the pop. And there's one more psychological factor that's critical: commitment and consistency. Many tulip speculators have publicly declared their belief in the market. They've convinced their families to invest. They've told their friends. They've staked their reputations on tulips being the future of wealth. To admit now that it might be a bubble would mean admitting they've been fools. The cognitive dissonance is too painful. So they double down, buying more, convincing themselves even more firmly that they're right. By January 1637, the tulip market has become entirely untethered from reality. The flowers themselves are almost irrelevant. What's being traded is pure speculation, bets on bets on bets. A particularly absurd trade from this period: someone exchanges a bed for oxen, 8 pigs, 12 sheep, 2 loads of wheat for loads of rye, a suit of clothes, a silver cup, and 2 barrels of beer for a single bulb. But here's the kicker. It's a bulb of a fairly common variety, not even a rare one. The buyer just assumes that since prices are rising everywhere, this bulb will also increase in value. This is the final stage of a bubble, when people stop differentiating quality and just buy anything because the market is going up. Professional tulip growers are watching this with growing alarm. They know their flowers. They know what's rare and what isn't. And they can see that the market has completely disconnected from botanical reality. But their concerns are dismissed. Their old economy. They don't understand the new paradigm. In the new tulip economy, it doesn't matter if a bulb produces a beautiful flower. All that matters is that someone else will pay more for it tomorrow. The music is still playing. Everyone's still dancing. The champagne is flowing. But in the back of the room, the band is starting to pack up. January 1637. The Dutch Republic is in the grip of tulip fever. The market has reached a level of frenzy that seems almost supernatural. Prices aren't just rising, they're exploding. Some tulip varieties are doubling in price every week. Let me give you a sense of the sheer scale. A Witt Kruinen tulip bulb, a decent but not particularly special variety, sells for 1,615 guilders. To put that in context, that's about 4 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. For single bulb, an Admiral Leifkin's bulb goes for 4,400 guilders. That's more than most people would earn in their entire lifetimes. And these aren't even the rarest varieties. Those are essentially priceless now. If you own a Semper Augustus, you can name your price. And whatever number you named, someone would pay it. The most remarkable thing about peak tulip mania isn't the prices themselves, it's who's paying them. It's not just wealthy merchants anymore. It's everyone. There's a documented case of a sailor who brings a rare bulb back from overseas, sells it for 3,000 guilders, literally a fortune, and proceeds to blow all the money celebrating because he knows he can just get more bulbs and repeat the process. Farmers are neglecting their crops to trade tulips. Why spend months growing wheat for 100 guilders when you can flip a tulip contract in a week for 1,000? Craftsmen are abandoning their trades. A master weaver can earn maybe 300 guilders a year after decades of learning his skill. Or he could buy a tulip future today and make that much by tomorrow. The rational economic choice, if you believe prices will keep rising, is to quit your job and trade tulips full-time. And that's exactly what's happening. The tavern colleges are packed morning to night. There's no longer a trading session. It's continuous. People are sleeping in taverns, afraid to go home and miss the next big opportunity. The social dynamics are incredible. Men who were nobody's last week are suddenly wealthy. Former servants are eating in expensive restaurants, dressed in fine clothes, talking loudly about their investments. Meanwhile, conservative merchants who've built legitimate businesses over decades are watching these newcomers make more in a month than they've made in years. The social hierarchy is being completely scrambled. Wealth, at least paper wealth, is being redistributed at a pace never before seen in human history. And this creates its own momentum. Every success story recruits more participants. A baker tells the story of how he bought a tulip future for 300 guilders on Monday and sold it for 450 guilders on Friday. A 50% return in 4 days. His story spreads through the neighborhood. A dozen other bakers hear about it. They think, if that fool can make 150 guilders in a week, so can I. They all buy tulip futures. And because they're all buying, prices go up, which means they all make money, which proves the first baker was right, which causes them to buy more, which pulls in more people. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, a perpetual motion machine of greed. But there's a darker side to this frenzy that people aren't talking about. The debt. Remember, most of these trades are leveraged. People aren't buying with cash, they're borrowing. They're signing promissory notes. They're selling assets and using the proceeds as down payments on even larger positions. One documented case. A merchant sells his house for 3,000 guilders. But instead of using that money to buy a different house, he uses it as margin to buy 15,000 guilders worth of tulip futures. If prices rise 10%, he makes 1,500 guilders profit, half the value of his house. The temptation is irresistible. But if prices fall 10%, he loses everything and still owes 12,000 guilders. He's worse than broke. He's in debt for life. Multiply this scenario across thousands of people, and you begin to see the catastrophe waiting to happen. Entire family fortunes are being wagered on flower bulbs. Dowries are being invested in tulips. Inheritance money is going into futures contracts. There's a grim joke circulating in Amsterdam. What's the difference between a wealthy merchant and a ruined gambler? About 6 weeks. But nobody's laughing, because everyone's winning. The joke seems like jealousy from people too scared to participate. And that fear, the fear of missing out, is driving people to take increasingly absurd risks. Women are selling jewelry to buy tulip contracts. Widows are investing their late husband's estates. Even servants are scraping together a few guilders to buy a fraction of a contract. The social proof is overwhelming. Tulips are the only topic of conversation in Dutch cities. You can't go to a market, a church, or a social gathering without hearing about someone's latest tulip triumph. By February 1637, the market has reached its absolute peak. Some historians estimate that the total value of tulip contracts in circulation equals several years of Holland's GDP. Think about that. The theoretical value of promises to deliver flower bulbs is worth more than the entire economic output of one of the richest nations on earth. But here's the terrifying part. Most of these contracts will never be fulfilled. See, the tulip futures market is largely fictional. Sellers are writing contracts to deliver bulbs they don't own. Buyers are purchasing with money they don't have. Both parties are counting on being able to sell the contract to someone else before delivery is due. It's a massive game of musical chairs, and nobody notices that there aren't enough chairs. The professional growers, the people who actually cultivate tulips, are watching this with mounting horror. They know how many tulip bulbs actually exist. They know how many can realistically be grown in a season. And they can see that the contracts being traded far exceed the physical supply of bulbs. When spring comes and these contracts need to be settled, there's going to be a problem. Some contracts will be for bulbs that don't exist. Others will be for bulbs that died over winter. Many will be from sellers who never had access to bulbs in the first place. But more fundamentally, many contracts will be held by buyers who can't actually pay. Remember, these are leverage positions. When a contract comes due, the buyer needs to produce the full amount, not just their initial down payment. What happens when thousands of people simultaneously realize they owe more money than they have? There are warning signs that a few astute observers are noticing. The quality of contracts being traded is declining. People are writing increasingly vague agreements. One bulb of good quality, instead of specifying the exact variety and characteristics. Some traders are taking longer to settle transactions. "I'll get you the money next week" starts to become a common refrain. A few sales are falling through. A buyer shows up to complete a purchase and suddenly gets cold feet. The seller has to scramble to find another buyer. These are cracks in the facade, minor tremors before the earthquake, but the party is too loud for anyone to hear them. On February 3rd, 1637, an auction is held in Haarlem, a major tulip trading city. It's a routine auction, nothing special. A decent selection of contracts for good varieties. The auctioneer begins his pitch. He presents the first lot, waits for bids. Nothing. He lowers the starting price. Still nothing. He tries again with the next lot. Same result. Finally, someone offers a bid, but it's 20% below the market price from the previous day. The auctioneer looks around the room. Is anyone going to counter? Anyone? Silence. That sale goes through at the lowball price. The next lot goes for even less. By the end of the auction, prices have fallen 30% from the previous week. News of the auction spreads quickly. By the next day, tulip traders across the country know about it. And they're asking themselves a question they've never had to consider before. What if nobody wants to buy my tulips? The Haarlem auction is like a pebble that starts an avalanche. Within days, panic spreads through the tulip markets. The tavern colleges that were packed with euphoric traders suddenly have a very different energy. People are nervous. Prices that were rock solid yesterday are suddenly negotiable. Buyers who were desperate to get in are now hesitant. Sellers who could name their price are now begging for offers. The shift in psychology is instantaneous and devastating. Just last week, if you owned a tulip contract, you knew you were rich. You could sell it any time for more than you paid. You were holding a golden ticket. Now you're looking at that contract and asking, is anyone going to want this? And if they do, how much will they actually pay? The confidence is evaporating like morning dew. And that's when the death spiral begins. You see, a bubble doesn't pop all at once. It's not like a balloon that explodes in an instant. It's more like a slow-motion car crash where everyone can see what's happening, but nobody can stop it. First, the most exposed traders start trying to sell. These are the people who are fully leveraged, who borrowed heavily to buy at the peak. They need to get out before prices fall further. But when they try to sell, there are no buyers at peak prices anymore. So they lower their asking price. Just a little. 10% below where the market was last week. Still no buyers. They lower it again. 20% below. Now someone bites. But to everyone else watching, that trade is the new market price. Which means everyone's tulip holdings just dropped 20% in value. People who were comfortably in profit are now starting to sweat. Those who bought on leverage are underwater. They're losing money, and they can't afford to lose money. So they panic and try to sell too, which pushes prices down further, which causes more panic, which causes more selling. It's a feedback loop in reverse. The same mechanism that drove prices up is now driving them down, except falling is so much faster than climbing. Within a week of the Harlem auction, prices have fallen 50%. Tulip varieties that were selling for 3,000 guilders are now changing hands for 1,500. If they can find a buyer at all. The tavern colleges are in chaos. Arguments break out. Fights erupt. Men who were friends last week are now screaming at each other, each blaming the other for the crash. Sellers are demanding that buyers honor their contracts. You signed this. You owe me 2,000 guilders. Buyers are refusing. For a bulb, that's now worth 500 guilders? I'm not paying that. Sue me. And many do sue. The Dutch court system is suddenly flooded with tulip-related lawsuits. Thousands of them. Contracts being disputed. Debts being contested. But here's the problem. The Dutch legal system has no framework for handling futures contracts. These informal tavern agreements? They're not technically legally binding. The courts start issuing rulings that essentially void the futures contracts. Buyers can walk away by paying a small penalty, usually 3.5% of the contract value. This seems like a relief at first. People who owe thousands can escape for a tiny fraction of that. But this ruling also confirms everyone's worst fear. The contracts are worthless. If you're holding a tulip contract and you know the buyer can just walk away by paying a few guilders, what's your contract worth? Almost nothing. The bottom falls out completely. By mid-February, tulip prices have collapsed 90% from their peak. By March, they're down 99%. That Semper Augustus bulb that was worth 6,000 guilders, enough to buy a mansion, it can't find a buyer at 60 guilders. Common varieties that were trading for hundreds of guilders are now worth less than a chicken. The wealth that people thought they had, the paper fortunes, the dreams of retirement, the plans for grand houses, all of it vanishes like smoke. But the debts? Those are very real. See, many people didn't just lose their investments. They lost money they borrowed, money they owe to real creditors with real legal rights. The merchant who sold his house for 3,000 guilders and leveraged it into 15,000 guilders of tulip contracts. His contracts are now worthless, but he still needs a place to live. And he can't buy back his house because someone else owns it now. He's homeless and in debt. Stories like this are playing out across the Netherlands. The human toll is staggering. There are documented cases of suicides, men jumping into canals, hangings. A father who gambled his daughter's dowry on tulips drinks poison when he realizes she can never marry now. Families are destroyed. A man who was eating in fine restaurants last month is now begging on the streets. A woman who had servants is now working as a servant herself. The social fabric is tearing apart. Friendships end. Business partnerships dissolve in acrimony. There's a pervasive sense of betrayal. Everyone feels cheated, even though there was no single villain. The taverns that hosted the tulip colleges are now nearly empty. Some have closed entirely. The few traders who still gather do so in grim silence, nursing their drinks, avoiding eye contact. There's a particular cruelty to how randomly the crash distributes its damage. Some people sold early, either out of caution or luck, and walked away with real profits. These are the smart money, and they're quietly wealthy. Others bought early and held too long, riding the bubble up and then all the way back down. They broke even at best, lost modestly at worst. But the real victims? The ones who bought in the final weeks of the mania. The people who saw everyone else getting rich and finally worked up the courage to jump in. They bought at the peak and sold at the bottom, or couldn't sell at all. These are often the people who could least afford to lose. The baker who invested his life savings. The widow who put her husband's inheritance into tulips hoping to secure her retirement. The young couple who borrowed against their future to get a stake in the market. They're completely wiped out. Worse than wiped out, they're in debt for life. And here's the psychological torture. It happened so fast. In January, they were geniuses. Everyone congratulated them for getting in. Everyone said they were smart to invest. By March, they're fools. The same people who encourage them now shake their heads and say, "How could you be so stupid?" The shame is almost worse than the financial loss. Families are humiliated. Men can't show their faces in their communities. Some flee to other cities to escape the gossip and judgment. There's a broader economic impact, too. All that borrowed money that went into tulips, it's not coming back. Creditors are taking losses. Banks are in trouble. The credit market, which had been so loose during the mania, suddenly tightens. If you want to borrow money for a legitimate business purpose, good luck. Lenders have been burned. Some legitimate businesses fail because they can't get credit. Others fail because their owners were secretly gambling in tulips and are now bankrupt. The Dutch government tries to intervene. They're facing a crisis. Should they enforce the contracts? That would cause mass bankruptcies. Should they void them? That rewards the speculators who defaulted. They eventually take a middle path. Contracts can be voided for a 3.5% penalty, but it satisfies no one. Sellers feel cheated. They're owed thousands but getting pennies. Buyers feel persecuted. They're being forced to pay penalties for contracts they never should have signed. The legal battles drag on for years. Some cases aren't resolved until the 1640s. But the markets are done. The tulip futures trading collapses entirely. A few legitimate growers continue cultivating tulips for collectors, but it returns to being a niche hobby. The speculation is over. The bubble has popped. In the aftermath, there's a strange silence. It's as if the entire nation wants to forget what happened. People don't talk about their tulip losses. It's too embarrassing, too painful. Within a few years, it's almost taboo to mention tulip mania in polite company. Everyone was involved or knows someone who was. Everyone feels foolish. But here's what's remarkable. The Dutch economy doesn't collapse. Sure, there's pain. There are bankruptcies. There's a small recession. But the underlying strength of the Dutch Golden Age, the trade networks, the manufacturing, the agriculture, the shipping, all of that is still intact. Tulip mania was a speculative frenzy built on top of a real economy. When the speculation collapsed, the real economy remained. Within a few years, Amsterdam is thriving again. The VOC is still making fortunes in Asia. Dutch ships still dominate global trade. New buildings are still going up along the canals. It's as if tulip mania was a fever dream, intense and terrifying while it lasted, but leaving surprisingly little permanent damage to the overall body. But individuals? Individual families and lives? Those scars run deep and last forever. And the psychological scars on the collective Dutch psyche? Those persist too. The Dutch develop a cultural wariness of speculation, a preference for solid, conservative investments, an aversion to get-rich-quick schemes. For generations afterward, tulip trader becomes an insult in the Netherlands, a way to call someone a foolish gambler. The crash becomes a cautionary tale told by parents to children. Don't be like the tulip traders. Don't gamble on fantasies. Build real wealth through real work. But the question remains, why did it happen? How could an entire nation of sophisticated, educated people fall for something so obviously absurd? That's what we need to understand next. In the years following the crash, Dutch society goes through a period of deep reflection. Writers, artists, philosophers, and economists all try to make sense of what happened. The satirical pamphlets that were dismissed during the mania are now taken seriously. The most famous is Samensprek tussen Weermond in die Gergoed, conversation between true mouth and greedy goods. It's a dialogue where a wise man explains to a greedy fool why tulip mania was doomed from the start. The pamphlet is brutal in its mockery, showing traders as delusional gamblers worshipping false idols. Dutch painters create moralizing artworks showing the folly of tulip speculation. Still life paintings include wilted tulips as symbols of vanity and the transience of earthly wealth. The cultural message is clear. Tulip mania was a moral failure as much as an economic one. People got greedy. They abandoned traditional values of hard work and thrift. They chased illusions instead of substance. And they paid the price. But is that the full story? Was tulip mania just a case of mass greed and stupidity? Modern economic historians have a more nuanced view. First, the context matters. The Dutch Golden Age had created unprecedented prosperity and social mobility. For the first time in history, ordinary people had disposable income and investment opportunities. But they had no financial education, no understanding of risk management, no framework for evaluating investments. When tulips appeared and started appreciating, it seemed like magic, but no more magical than the VOC stock that had made people wealthy or the commodities trading that had built Dutch fortunes. To a 1630s Dutchman, tulip futures might have seemed as legitimate as any other commercial venture. Second, the futures market actually served a real economic purpose initially. Tulip growers needed a way to lock in prices before the growing season. Buyers wanted to secure rare varieties before they sold out. The futures market solved both problems. It was innovative financial engineering that created real value. The problem wasn't the instrument itself. It was what happened when speculators overwhelmed the market, detaching it from its underlying purpose. Third, the social dynamics were unprecedented. This was one of the first times in history that a large middle class had access to a speculative market. Previous financial manias, the Roman debt crises, the medieval banking crashes, those involved elites. The masses weren't participating. But in 1630s Netherlands, everyone could play. And there was no regulatory framework, no circuit breakers, no institutional knowledge about bubbles, because bubbles at this scale hadn't happened before. In some ways, Dutch society was a victim of its own success. They were so advanced, so prosperous, so innovative that they created a market phenomenon nobody understood. That said, there are clear lessons that emerge from the rubble. Lesson 1. Prices disconnected from fundamentals are unsustainable. A tulip bulb has intrinsic value as a decorative flower. That value might be 10 to 50 guilders depending on rarity and beauty. When prices reach thousands of guilders, that's purely speculative value. Value based on the hope that someone else will pay even more. This can work for a while, even for a surprisingly long while. But eventually, you run out of greater fools. When the music stops and everyone looks around asking, what is this actually worth? The answer is usually far lower than the peak price. Lesson 2. Leverage amplifies both gains and losses. If tulip mania had been conducted with cash only, it would have been expensive but not devastating. People would have lost money they actually had. But leverage turned a bubble into a catastrophe. People lost not just their own money, but money they borrowed. This created a cascade of defaults that spread the damage throughout the economy. Leverage is the difference between a painful correction and a systemic crisis. Lesson 3. Social proof overrides individual judgment. Humans are social creatures. When everyone around us is doing something, our brains interpret that as evidence that it's correct. This usually serves us well. Following the crowd keeps us safe and connected to our community. But in financial markets, following the crowd leads you straight into bubbles. By the time everyone agrees an investment is good, you're probably near the top. Lesson 4. New technologies enable new manias. The tulip futures market was enabled by innovations in contract law, credit systems, and organized trading venues. These are financial technologies that made speculation easier and more accessible. The innovations weren't bad in themselves, but they created opportunities for excess that nobody anticipated. This pattern repeats throughout history. Every new financial technology, from joint stock companies to electronic trading to cryptocurrency, goes through an initial phase of speculative mania. Lesson 5. Bubbles are obvious in hindsight, but invisible from inside. Read about tulip mania today, and it seems insane. How could anyone pay 6,000 guilders for a flower bulb? But if you were living through it in 1636, surrounded by success stories, watching your cautious neighbors miss out on easy profits, feeling the social pressure to participate, would you have been different? Bubbles are sustained by intelligent people making what seem like rational decisions based on the information and social context available to them. The Dutch weren't idiots. They were normal people caught in an extraordinary situation. The economic recovery happens faster than anyone expects. By 1640, Dutch trade is booming again. By 1650, Amsterdam is wealthier than ever. This teaches an important lesson too. Speculative bubbles, even devastating ones, don't destroy underlying economic strength. The Dutch economy was built on real things: shipbuilding, trade networks, manufacturing, agriculture. Tulip mania was froth on top of that solid foundation. When the froth blew away, the foundation remained. However, the legal and regulatory aftermath shapes Dutch finance for generations. The court's decision to make futures contracts unenforceable sets a precedent. For decades afterward, commodities futures are treated with suspicion. Margin trading is restricted. The Dutch develop what we might call financial conservatism. They remain innovative in trade and industry, but they're cautious about speculation. This cultural shift arguably prevents future tulip-style manias in the Netherlands, even as other countries experience their own bubbles in the 18th and 19th centuries. But here's the paradox. The lessons of tulip mania should have prevented all future bubbles. Everyone knew the story. Everyone understood the warnings. And yet, bubbles kept happening. The South Sea bubble in 1720, almost identical dynamics, just with company shares instead of tulips. The railway mania of the 1840s, same fever, different industry. The dot-com bubble of the 1990s, tulips with modems. The 2008 housing crisis, leveraged speculation in real estate. The crypto boom and bust cycles, digital tulips. Why do we keep making the same mistakes? Because the lessons of tulip mania aren't about tulips. They're about human psychology. And human psychology doesn't change. We still feel greed. We still feel FOMO. We still want to believe we've found the secret to easy wealth. We still trust social proof over our own judgment. We still think this time is different. Which brings us to today. Because if tulip mania teaches us anything, it's that bubbles never really go away. They just change costumes. Let's talk about Bitcoin. December 2017. Bitcoin hits nearly $20,000. Your coworker, who could barely use email 6 months ago, is now explaining blockchain technology to you. Your uncle posts on Facebook about becoming a crypto millionaire. Financial media can't stop talking about it. Everyone who bought is rich. Everyone who didn't is missing out. The FOMO is unbearable. Sound familiar? Now, I'm not saying Bitcoin is exactly like tulips. Blockchain technology is real. Cryptocurrency has actual utility, or at least it might have utility in the future. But the psychology, the market dynamics, the social mania, that's pure tulip mania. Let's look at the parallels. The exotic new thing. Tulips in 1636. A mysterious flower from the East that Europeans had never seen before. Exciting. Different. Sophisticated people own them. Crypto in 2017. A mysterious technology from the internet that most people don't understand. Exciting. Different. Sophisticated people own it. In both cases, the newness is part of the appeal. If you understand it, you're ahead of the curve. You're smarter than everyone else. You're getting in early on the future. The greater fool theory. Tulips. I'm buying this bulb for 3,000 guilders because someone will pay 4,000. Crypto. I'm buying this Bitcoin for $15,000 because someone will pay $20,000. In neither case is the buyer primarily interested in the intrinsic value or utility. They're buying because they expect price appreciation. This works until it doesn't. The democratization of speculation. Tulips. For the first time, ordinary Dutch citizens could participate in speculative markets. Farmers and bakers were trading alongside merchants. Crypto. For the first time, anyone with a smartphone can trade 24/7. Robinhood and Coinbase make it as easy to buy crypto as to order pizza. When speculation becomes accessible to everyone, you get mass participation. And mass participation is both the fuel for bubbles and the source of widespread damage when they pop. The leverage problem. Tulips. Traders bought on margin, borrowing to amplify their positions. Crypto. Traders use leverage on platforms like Binance and FTX, taking on massive risk for potentially massive rewards. And just like in 1637, when a market turns, the leverage transforms losses into catastrophes. Remember FTX? The crypto exchange that collapsed in 2022, vaporizing billions in customer funds? That's a modern version of the Dutch tavern colleges going bankrupt when contracts couldn't be honored. The social proof machine. Tulips. Trading groups in taverns created echo chambers where everyone reinforced each other's belief in rising prices. Crypto. Twitter, Reddit, Discord servers. Digital taverns where crypto enthusiasts share success stories, memes, and conviction that diamond hands will prevail. The hype cycles are identical. HODL is just the 2020s version of tulips only go up. The moment of realization. Tulips, the Harlem auction in February 1637 when nobody bid. Crypto, Bitcoin crashes from $20,000 to $3,000 over the course of 2018. All the predicted $50,000 guaranteed targets vanish. Wait, you say, but Bitcoin came back. It hit $60,000 in 2021. True. And you know what? Tulip prices recovered somewhat too. Rare tulips were valuable again within a few years. Not at mania prices, but at legitimate collector prices. The question isn't whether the underlying asset has value. It's whether the price at any given moment reflects that value or reflects speculation. Bitcoin at $3,000 might be undervalued. Bitcoin at $60,000 might be overvalued. The mania isn't about the technology, it's about the detachment from rational valuation. The "this time is different" syndrome. This is the most dangerous parallel. In 1636, tulip traders genuinely believed they had discovered a new paradigm. Tulips were different from other commodities. They were scarce. They were beautiful. They were status symbols. The traditional rules didn't apply. In 2017, crypto enthusiasts genuinely believed they had discovered a new paradigm. Crypto was different from traditional assets. It was decentralized. It was the future of money. The traditional rules didn't apply. Both groups were partly right. Tulips did have unique properties. Crypto does have innovative features. But that didn't mean prices could rise forever without correction. "This time is different" are the four most dangerous words in investing. Because things are never as different as they seem in the moment. Let's look at some other modern tulip manias. NFTs, 2021 to 2022. Non-fungible tokens. Unique digital assets on the blockchain. A JPEG of a bored ape sells for $3 million. Twitter avatars become status symbols. Everyone rushes to mint and flip NFTs. This is literally digital tulips. Unique items with no intrinsic utility, valued purely because of scarcity and social signaling, traded in frenzied markets by people hoping to flip them to someone else. And just like tulips, when the music stopped, prices collapsed 90% plus. The celebrities who bought NFTs at the peak quietly changed their profile pictures back. Meme stocks, 2021. GameStop, AMC, and others surge hundreds of percent as retail traders coordinate on Reddit. The fundamentals don't matter. The thesis is simple. We're all buying, so the price goes up. It's the tavern college mentality, just hosted on our /Wall Street bets instead of a 17th century pub. Some people made fortunes. Many more bought at the peak and lost big. SPACs, 2020 to 2021. Special purpose acquisition companies. Blank check companies that raise money to acquire something later. At the peak, every celebrity and investor was launching SPACs. The deals were questionable, but the hype was real. Then reality hit. Most SPACs crashed 70 to 90% from their peaks. Investors who bought into the mania got crushed. AI stocks, 2023 present. Now, I'm not saying AI is a bubble. AI is clearly transformative technology with real applications. But when NVIDIA's market cap increases by hundreds of billions in weeks, when every company adds AI to their description to pump their stock, when startup valuations go stratospheric based on AI buzzwords, we should at least ask, how much of this is fundamental value, and how much is speculation? The lesson isn't that these technologies are worthless. Some tulips genuinely were beautiful and worth owning. Some crypto projects will succeed. AI will transform the world. The lesson is, don't confuse a real innovation with a guarantee that prices will go up forever. Here's what's fascinating. We know about TULIP mania. Everyone in finance knows the story. It's taught in economics classes. It's referenced constantly, and yet we keep repeating it. Why? Because knowledge isn't enough. You can intellectually understand that bubbles happen and still get caught in one. When you're living through it, it doesn't feel like a bubble. It feels like an opportunity, like being smart, like getting in early on something real. All your friends are making money. Experts on TV are bullish. The price charts go up and to the right. Your caution looks like cowardice. Your skepticism looks like jealousy. The social and psychological pressures are overwhelming. Here's a personal thought experiment. If you were a Dutch merchant in 1636, watching your neighbors get rich on tulips, would you have stayed out? Really? Would you have been the only person at the tavern shaking your head and saying, "This is madness," while everyone else celebrated their profits? Or would you have convinced yourself that maybe they're onto something? That maybe this time really is different? So what do we take away from all this? Tulip mania isn't really about tulips. It's not even really about money. It's about something deeper in human nature. Our capacity for collective delusion, our susceptibility to greed, our desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a shortcut to wealth. The economist John Maynard Keynes had a term for this: animal spirits, the irrational psychological forces that drive economic behavior beyond pure rational calculation. We want to believe we're logical. We want to think we make decisions based on careful analysis and data. But we're emotional creatures. We're social creatures. And those forces often override our rationality. Greed is a powerful emotion. Not just greed for money, though that's part of it, but greed for status, for vindication, for the feeling of being right when others were wrong. Fear is equally powerful. Fear of missing out. Fear of being left behind. Fear of looking foolish for not participating. These emotions don't disappear just because we're sophisticated and educated. The Dutch in 1636 were arguably the most financially sophisticated society on earth at that time. Didn't matter. They fell for it anyway, and will fall for it again. In fact, we're probably in the middle of falling for something right now and don't realize it. That's not pessimism. It's realism. But here's the hopeful part. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to avoid every bubble. You don't even need to time every market perfectly. You just need to be aware, conscious, skeptical of your own certainty. When everyone around you is convinced that some asset can only go up, that's when you should be most cautious. When financial media is breathlessly covering the latest trend, when your relatives who never invest are suddenly experts, when people are quitting their jobs to trade full-time, those are warning signs. You don't have to short the market. You don't have to be the person predicting doom. You just have to protect yourself. Diversify. Don't over-leverage. Don't invest money you can't afford to lose. Don't assume current trends will continue forever. These sound like boring, obvious rules. They are. That's why people ignore them during manias. Diversify. But crypto is the only thing going up. Don't leverage. But that's how you multiply gains. Only invest what you can afford. But this is a sure thing. The Dutch tulip traders had the same thoughts. Every generation of bubble victims has the same thoughts. And every generation of survivors are the boring ones who stuck to the fundamentals. Here's another crucial lesson. Markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. Even if you correctly identify a bubble, you might be early. Tulip prices rose for years before crashing. Bitcoin hit $20,000, crashed, then went to $60,000 years later before crashing again. Being right about a bubble doesn't mean you'll profit from being right. In fact, fighting a bubble can destroy you. So the wisdom isn't avoid all risk or never participate in new markets. The wisdom is know yourself, know your limits, know when you're being driven by FOMO rather than analysis. And maybe most importantly, don't risk what you can't afford to lose. The Dutch who lost their houses, their life savings, their families' futures, they didn't just make bad investments. They made existential bets. They risked everything on tulips. That's the tragedy. Not that they lost money, but that they gambled their entire lives. Some lost and recovered. Some lost and never recovered. All of them would have been better off keeping some money in boring, safe assets that wouldn't change their lives if lost. There's a final lesson that's perhaps the most important. Financial markets are not casinos, but they can become casinos when speculation overwhelms investment. Investment is putting money into something because you believe in its fundamental value and want to share in its long-term success. Speculation is putting money into something because you think someone else will pay more for it soon. Both have a place in markets. But when speculation dominates, when nobody cares about fundamentals and everyone's just trying to flip to the next buyer, that's when you're in tulip territory. Ask yourself with any investment, am I buying this because I believe in its long-term value? Or am I buying because I think the price will go up? If it's the latter, tread very carefully. The tulip traders of 1637 weren't evil. They weren't even particularly foolish. They were human. They had dreams. They wanted security for their families. They wanted to move up in the world. And they genuinely believed tulips were their ticket. We should have compassion for them, because we're them. In different clothes, with different assets, in different centuries, but the same hopes, the same fears, the same vulnerabilities. The question isn't whether you'll ever be tempted by a bubble. You will. The question is, when that temptation comes, will you recognize it? And will you have the discipline to step back? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Tulip mania happened 400 years ago, but the lessons are as relevant today as they were in 1637. Maybe more relevant, because the pace of markets has accelerated. What took months to unfold in tulip mania now happens in days with modern financial markets. The bubbles come faster. The manias burn hotter. The crashes hit harder. But the underlying psychology remains identical. So stay humble. Stay skeptical. Stay diversified. And when you see the tulips being passed around, whatever form they take, remember the Dutch merchants who thought they'd found the secret to effortless wealth. They hadn't, and neither have we. But armed with this knowledge, maybe, just maybe, we can avoid being the greatest fool. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own investments differently, hit that like button. This is the kind of deep dive, history meets finance content we do here at Vaulted Wisdom. We unlock the lessons from the past to help you navigate the present. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're just getting started. Coming up, we've got the South Sea bubble, imagine tulip mania, but with an entire country's economy on the line. We've got the dot-com bubble, tulips with websites. We got the 2008 financial crisis, tulips hiding inside mortgages. History's greatest financial disasters, explained in a way that actually makes sense. And more importantly, in a way that helps you spot the next one before it's too late. Drop a comment. What's the modern bubble you're most worried about? Is it AI stocks? Real estate? Something else entirely? Let's discuss. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. That friend who keeps texting you about their crypto gains. That family member who wants to quit their job to day trade. That coworker who thinks they've found the next big thing. They need to know about the tulips. Because those who don't learn from history aren't just doomed to repeat it. They're doomed to lose everything repeating it. Thanks for spending this time unlocking wisdom from the vault with me. I'll see you in the next one. Remember, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never, ever pay 6,000 guilders for a flower bulb, unless you're the one selling it.